watching and listening to those customers, making sure you're asking the right questions, making sure you're really digging in. Of course, they may not always tell you exactly what they need, but by observing, you can see it pretty clearly.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Danny Morrow, co-founder and CTO of Extend. Extend turns your business credit card into a spend management platform so you can achieve more with what's yours. Danny, I'm so excited to chat with you, not only because of what you've been able to do with Extend and what you've built so far, but also just the history of your entrepreneur journey, going from art to entrepreneurship and really just kind of creating all these opportunities to kind of see whether it's insights into products or user experiences. Really excited to chat with your experience in how not only you've created products, but how consumer behavior has evolved and what you've done during that process. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started the company?
Well, and even before then, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Super excited, big fan. So prior to Extend, I had a consultancy in New York building products and all sorts of things, digital things mostly for consumer luxury goods brand. So this is actually my first dip into B2B and into payments, my first rodeo there, but it's been a super exciting journey.
And thinking about like building for consumers, what have you seen the changes in terms of the buying behaviors? Have you had to adjust a lot, or they're fairly similar, or are there different variables you have to consider in that for those who don't know?
Well, from my point of view, I think that's a bit of the secret sauce that I and Extend are bringing to the B2B space, is bringing a bit of that consumer experience into B2B products, which have really often been kind of a bit lagging in experience. And they're on your iPhone, they're on your desktop right next door to your Uber and to your Facebook and whatnot. And it's a little odd that you would have this experience from the 90s in your B2B and then all the modern bells and whistles in your consumer experiences. And so the way we built the team is really to try to bring that consumer ease of use to what traditionally has been a very complicated set of products.
And why is there that disconnect between those two types of products and that connection to the experience? Are companies building for the wrong purpose? Are they not looking at the right pieces of feedback? Why is that such a disconnect in those experiences? Being that I think now, of course, more than ever, I think we're kind of seeing that bleed into every product. We have kind of a standard for our experiences, but why do companies get it wrong or aren't hitting it?
I think oftentimes they pile on requirements for B2B products, right? And they say, it has to have these 10 very complicated requirements. Otherwise, it's not a pro tool. And I think what's missing there is actually, no, people don't necessarily need all of those. And sometimes having more constraints can lead you to having a better product overall. I think we see that time and again. But sometimes, other folks, as they're thinking about B2B, just try to overcomplicate it. It's the opposite of what we've tried to do, quite obviously. We really try to make it as simple as possible because we recognize it's already a complex space. At the same time, though, you can't make a toy, right? It has to serve its purpose, and you have to take your end users seriously. You just sometimes can't take a laundry list of features. You have to distill that down into what's really the essence.
Yeah. And how do you distill the essence in respect to what's most valuable for the end user and how to create as minimal barriers as possible for whatever action you're trying to get out of them?
Well, I think it's all about actually talking to those users. There's no way around that. And I think the farther the distance from the folks who are designing the product from those end users, and the farther the distance from the engineers from those end users, the more problems you're going to have. And so how can you really speak to your users as often as possible, hear what they're saying, take it seriously? My background is in product design from back in the day when that meant not digital, but physical things. And all we learned was you have to observe and watch and talk. You can't think that you have the right answer. The users know the right answer.
That's so fascinating thinking about it. The experience has taught you the tactics of observing and watching. And through that kind of more physical medium, what were some things that you absorbed and still kind of use to this day? What were some of those things that you saw people and how they interacted with, whether it was art or whether it was a product? What are some things that you saw that still lasted it?
I think it's just listening, being empathetic, and really hearing what people are saying. It can be difficult sometimes, as any product designer or any engineer may have already a preconceived notion about what the right answer is, right? Air quotes, right answer. And so it really is about putting those preconceived notions, those biases aside, and watching and listening to those customers, making sure you're asking the right questions, making sure you're really digging in. Of course, they may not always tell you exactly what they need, but by observing, you can see it pretty clearly.
Yeah. with the digital product like Extend, what are some of those things, and how are you getting to your user to actually understand what they need out of your product, or what you may need to build further on, or the decisions you need to make? How do you distill that information, actually extract the things that are important versus going so many directions, which a lot of founders, I think, time and time again, I mean, we all have that, right? We want to chase certain product features and we have to really take a step back to see what's important. What are some tactics you deploy that to actually distill that information that's important?
Well, we always interview our clients. And so as many end users as we can get, we want to interview. We'll talk to anyone, and not anyone who's going to volunteer that, or even folks who are having a problem. That's a great opportunity to turn someone around who's having an issue and to really dive into what's the issue they're having. Is it actually the product, or is it how they're using the product? Is there a gap in our features? Or are they misunderstanding? I think something that we're very heavily invested on recently is education. We recognize we're effectively we're not the only ones, but we're inventing a new product type, right? A virtual card, a digital card is definitely new to many folks, and explaining to them both that basic concept and then the features that we built on top and expanded upon. We really need to educate our user base. So really, how do you make that as simple as possible to come by, both the product and the education? I think it's constant listening. We have our product folks having interviews. We have our sales teams that are supporting end users, speaking to them and advocating on their behalf. So it's really about just constantly getting that feedback. And that's what we aim for.
Yeah. I understand. I'm sure a lot has evolved from the conception of Extend to where it is now today, even technologies, consumer behaviors. But when you think back, when you were kind of first building the company and the product, where was the space at that time, and how much were people actually adopting these digital platforms and using these digital products in comparison to how it is now? Have we seen that mass adoption, or are we still kind of waiting for a lot more people to kind of get on board?
Well, I think when it comes to virtual cards, especially in the B2B space and the commercial space, we were relatively early to the product. And so we've been in business for nearly 7 years, and not a lot of folks were talking about virtual cards back then. And I think what we thought about was it was going to be all about giving cards to uncarded employees. So did they have to take a trip? Did they have to go to a conference, right? And so could we help pay for airfare, hotel, conference entrance fee, your taxi or your Uber, all of things that if someone didn't have a card, they were expensing and then waiting to get reimbursed. And that on its face is pretty ridiculous. Like, you might lend your company a couple $1,000s and they're good for it, but you still have to wait a couple of weeks to get paid back. So that on itself is problematic and not a space that we've let go of. But of course we evolved because COVID came along and no one was traveling. No one's going to conferences. And we were all sitting alone in our houses, still working together, growing the team, building the product. And we noticed that spend did not go down the way we expected. It actually really amped up. And that what we saw for our small businesses is that they need to solve a problem of tail spend, meaning spend that they didn't have an easy way to pay for. Maybe I like to think of it as I lodge my virtual cards in AWS and in GitHub and in Jira and any number of the SaaS tools I used to run our business. Now, if back in the day, pre-COVID, everyone sitting in an office, someone might have handed me a card and I would have just keyed it in. But instead now I had no way to do that. And so we were creating virtual cards to pay for those sorts of things, and for allowing other people to pay for those sorts of things. So really delegating that responsibility. And that's how our business really evolved. And when I think traditionally virtual cards have been used by big enterprises paying invoices, one real big use case. And so we brought the power of virtual cards from enterprise sized clients down to small SMBs. And so that was the first thing that we did, was just realizing actually just giving access, instant access, that alone is valuable. And that in general, I think that's Fintech is all about, can I ease onboarding? Can I reduce friction? The fact that we could take the physical plastic card that your bank had already issued to you and allow you to enroll and extend and create virtual cards. That was something that had never been done before. And then allow these folks to do that remotely while everyone's separated during COVID and pay for all these expenses their business was still incurring was incredibly, incredibly powerful. And we've unlocked a whole number of other use cases that are really very interesting. But that was the first big aha moment, I think, for Extend, when we really started to see that traction, even though we were expecting, oh no, we're in trouble. No one's in an office, no one's traveling.
It's so fascinating thinking about that tail end spend. And also just not only do you reduce the friction of onboarding and access, but that visibility piece, I feel like reduces the risk for even just having a virtual card as a small business, because I think a lot of small business owners will just assess the risk as if it's their personal credit card. And if you add an addition to that, it has different effects than on your business. And describe some of the really cool insights I'm sure that you've offered customers now that they've had this ability. And what have you seen them in terms of ways that they've changed their spend behaviors and any success stories and what's that meant to their business?
Yeah. Like you said, there's a number of different benefits that virtual cards bring, and different businesses, depending on what category they're in, leverage different benefits, right? And so there's the obvious benefit of I can create an unlimited number of cards from my card and really monitor the spend on each card and control the spend on each card. And to some businesses, that's important. They may lodge a virtual card, again, like I said, with AWS or with another vendor, and they want to control how much spend is going on that card. We have ad agencies that buy, say, Google ads or Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads for their clients. So it's pass-through spend, and they want to cap how much spend is on each ad buy. And we all know when you buy online ads, it's a pretty rough number, right? You can tell Google you want to spend 500 and they're like, oops, we spent 7.
Yeah.
What do we know?
Sorry.
And so with virtual cards, you can really control that very, very accurately. So that's incredibly valuable. Then beyond that, and I think this has been eye-opening and a good learning for us, and I think where the industry is really going, it's all about reconciliation. So how can I track the spend that I had? And that, like I said, a big learning for us. In the beginning, we were just concerned with how can we get cards with controls in people's hands? And then very quickly, our client said, no, but I need to see where that spend happened. I need to reconcile it. I need to get it into my platform of choice. And so again, if I go back to those ad agencies, or if you think of law firms who may want to use virtual cards to spend per client, they may have client filings they have to make. And at any one time, they have 10, 20, 100 different clients that they're making court filings for, or paying for experts or other sorts of data. They're all using the same card number. There's no way to track that. And now the controls of virtual cards are less important there. But the reconciliation to say, I made a different card potentially for each case or for each different client, and I know when that transaction comes back in for that client, I can easily bill them back for it. Incredibly, incredibly powerful, right? And so like I said, it's a different type of feature of the virtual card that appealed to different clients. And in some cases, they want to be able to clients want to track each individual transaction. And so they're going to make a card for each individual transaction. Again, it may not be important to have the controls, but they do want to know transaction occurred. I can map it, see it instantly, right? And so when someone uses our APIs, they can create a tremendous amount of virtual cards. They can use them for transactions, and our webhooks will tell them in real time, transaction occurred and the card turns off.
Yeah. I mean, the level of transparency, I think, is just so critical to a lot of these crucial decisions, but also I feel like procurement, spend management, all these different categories are really so powerful now that not only after COVID, companies had to be resilient, but even with economic climate and VC funding rounds, you see a lot of companies being mature in the sense of really operating efficiently. And it's incredible to see tools like you allowing that to even just be done in an effective timeline. I'm sure it was done at some point, but it was tracked and took way longer than it does through a platform like yours. But you're thinking about how when you did kind of really push to go virtual and saw this kind of change in the market, how did you introduce that to your customers? How did you make that introduction to the market? And did you do a whole kind of product relaunch? Was it kind of a slow release? I feel like a lot of founders, when they either have a more significant feature or even like a version change, they struggle with deciding what's the best way to introduce that to capitalize on the momentum or the timing. What would you do?
Well, I think there's a really interesting part about our business that we haven't yet discussed, in that we don't necessarily go to market on our own, right? And so distinct from some other folks who are maybe in the same space, who are working with modern credit card issuance, who are dealing with virtual cards, we always partner with mainstream banks. And so by doing that, we are just the technology provider. Again, we don't even underwrite anyone. We don't issue any cards. We don't move any money. And so, but the flip side of that as well is that our partner banks are the ones advocating for the use of the product. They're effectively selling the product, right? In general, you don't think of a credit card as a product that end corporate buys, right? But they certainly use. And so in order for when we release new features, the sales teams at individual banks that we're partnered with are telling their clients, hey, by the way, did you know there's this new feature? They know which of their clients have been asking for this, and they know we provide them with data, and they know which of their clients might need this without asking first, right? And so we really help and support these existing banks with a whole new feature set. And that's very, very powerful. But it means in general, we're not the ones doing the first reach out to clients. It's those banks.
Yeah.
And those banks, they may be, depending on the size of the bank and the size of their relationship, they may be sending an email out to their client base saying, hey, by the way, did you know that with Extend, you can do this with your existing card? Much like you would think of Apple Pay with marketing.
Yeah.
Or they may be doing a direct reach out, right? For larger clients, they're going to have a relationship manager who's going to support them. And they probably speak, if it's monthly or weekly, say, hey, there's a new feature here. I know you've been asking about virtual cards. Now we're ready. Or I know you're always talking about this and you're having these challenges. Here's a way you could solve that. And it makes the bank look really, really smart. And that's really the business that we're in. We're not looking out to make a brand for ourselves. We're looking just how can we support these existing banks and being that infrastructure behind the scenes.
And how do you communicate that? Obviously, that initial partnership always kind of trickles down and create other ones as well. But when you are communicating your value to a new partnership, what are some tactics or talk tracks that you use to really, obviously you're a service company, you have your own incentive, but really you do supercharge the banks to be intelligent and offer their clients something more through this. How are you able to communicate that and partner with banks to be able to do that? Because obviously that's like, I mean, that's creme de la creme for client, new customer acquisition is to have a partner that sells for you. So yeah.
Yes. Well, I think the first thing is that we, and I use the royal we here as I started from the top. I don't come from payments or cards, but we have my two partners, both are ex-Amex alumni and other have been around the payment space for quite some time. And we've built our team actually fairly senior with people from the card payment space because so much of that is relationship based when you're doing these large B2B enterprise sales, which any bank sale is going to be. And so there's that trust in the marketplace that we've earned over 7 years and prior, because it's based on relationships going back 20 years, tens of years, what I was going to say. And so that's important to leverage that. And then it's a really relatively straightforward talk track of a sale, because at the end of the day, we're making the bank more money.
Yeah.
Every time a bank, one of its cardholders uses its credit card, the bank makes money. It makes that interchange, the issuing bank. And we allow more credit card volume to flow to that bank. And so they make more money. So that part is an easy story.
Yeah.
It's then about how does it align with what they're thinking about today? And how does it align with how they see the market, what products they want to bring to the market? But overall, I think it's a very straight line. We make money when they make money. And so it works out quite well.
Yeah. So customer acquisition, that seems to be humming at a steady pace. You raise money, you're growing your team, you feel like you have strong product market fit. What's the challenge then now? What are the things that you're facing today that you see as hurdles that your company still has to go over to continue to expand?
Well, we're a Series B company. We have product market fit, we are growing, and the challenges are all about how do you continue that growth, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't come easy. And so it's about to continue the pace of growth that we want to see. And it's continuing it in tougher economic climate. Companies, like you mentioned, are looking at their spend. We are directly impacted. We make money on how much money companies spend. So that's always an important thing to keep an eye on. And there's broader macroeconomic trends just make it less easy than it was perhaps a year and a half ago. And I think that's all great. I think we've always run our business in a very mature fashion. We weren't about acquiring customers at any cost. We weren't about spending money just because we had raised a big round. We've been very mature about that. But what we hear in the market now is it's important to make your funds go farther.
Yeah.
And so that's part of looking very closely at where do our revenues come from. Obviously, we need to continue really strong revenue growth and keep pushing that and thinking about, okay, what tweaks on our product can I make that are going to add new sources of revenue? What new features can I add? And really, again, going back to listening to the customer, hearing what their challenges are and how can we make our product more sticky so they want to keep using us even in these challenging times.
Yeah. Thinking about long-term vision, if everything goes well, what is the long-term vision for Extend?
So I think there are multiple versions of the long-term vision. I think the nearest term long-term, if you will, is we like to see ourselves potentially like a Zelle, if you're familiar with that, right? So there was an existential crisis that PayPal and Venmo were taking away business that truly rightfully belonged to Main Street banks. And so they formed a consortium and built a product that has many trillions of dollars flowing through it. We see ourselves as the same. Can we provide a product or a platform, that's used jointly by many different banks to really grow their own revenue? That's our nearest term, long-term vision, and just be ubiquitous. And again, not concerned about is the brand Extend there, but in the back is the plumbing and the wires, is that Extend. And I think we've already gone well down that path. Right now, I think at last count, we're over 50% of commercial card holders can actually use Extend. But we'd like to push that to be significantly higher, 60, 70, 80%. Then you have the very, very long tail in the US. There are a huge number of banks. Yeah. But we'd really like to get to a point where we could really have that great coverage. Yeah. I think beyond that, we certainly eventually would like to turn our attention to consumer. I think everything we do with virtual cards today for commercial spend, so much of that can make sense for a family. Do you have a caregiver that you want to give a card to so that they can take care of your children? Do you have your children themselves, potentially who are in college age or younger, who you'd like to have control over what they're spending and see their individual transactions, but still give them a credit card? Do you want to send cross-border payments? Potentially, a lot of cross-border payments today are being used for things like electric bills and cell phone bills that would already accept a credit card. Yeah. Could you send a card number that someone would lodge and then pay for that? So it kind of really starts to evolve there once you get in consumer as well. But the first and foremost, we're heavily focused on commercial and seeing how that growth goes because there's still so much of the market to tap.
Yeah. I love this next section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see what we get. So first question I always like to open it up with is, what's particularly hard about your job day to day?
It takes a lot of attention, and it takes I think it's both a pro and a con. It's always something different every day, and it's kept it fresh every day. And so 7 years in, it certainly keep learning, keep growing. But that certainly, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. What's something when you think about, obviously hiring is so key to a lot of success of companies, probably paramount to any successful company. What are some ways or maybe even some lessons you've learned about hiring good talent, assessing good talent, bringing people on board that can really kind of propel your team? Obviously, sounds like you built a team around the financial industry, being that it's so closely related. But outside of that, how do you go about that assessment for founders who are looking for that guidance?
Right. And I would say we've built around the financial industry for our relationship, for our business development, for our sales teams. For our engineering team, we've taken folks from all walks of life. We actually don't really have too many folks who've been at a bank or doing payments before, because we believe it's important to bring strong engineering to the table. Doesn't really matter if you have the experience at this specific domain, we can teach you that. Right. And same thing. I learned it joining Extend. I think it's something everyone can learn. I think the real key that we've done is we built a really strong foundation, hiring very slowly in the beginning, in the early days, to make sure that we really had that strong foundation of people who believed in Extend and who believe what we believe. And so it's all about curiosity. It's all about empowering people to keep learning and growing and allowing them to do their best work. Because I think if you have curious people who want to do their best work and you give them challenging problems, they're just going to run to it, right? That nothing makes them happier. And then once you have that foundation, and we skewed towards more senior engineers at that point, talking about engineering, and then we filled in the more junior ranks, mostly with co-op programs. And so we have a very strong relationship with Waterloo University in Toronto. Yeah. And so they have a co-op program, and the engineers that we get they come stay with us for about 4 months. And by the time they've already come to us, they probably had 3 or 4 of those 4-month co-ops under their belt. So they're already a year in. And they're super sharp, and we just get to, we throw them in. We don't get your typical internship experience. We give them, nope, you're an employee of Extend. You're going to learn, you're going to build all the real things. And that gives us a chance to meet tons of folks and see who's going to be that right fit. And then we've just hired extensively from the people that we love. And then and we've grown the junior ranks that way, again, with the same mentality. We know that people want to learn, people want to grow, people are curious, people want to be supportive. And so that's just, we give them those opportunities, they really come running. I've also leaned very heavily on kind of everyone's got to be a good person. So I'm really, really proud of the team that we've built. A bunch of really curious, super smart folks, but I love being around them all. And then that kind of self-perpetuates. At this point, I'm not doing the hiring anymore. I'm the last stamp of approval. I'm the one who gets to sell Extend when we have a really strong client that we have to convince, but I know the team is looking out, and really the beauty of it, they're following our vision and they're making it their own.
Yeah. What are some things that you've learned and that have helped your success at Extend in regards to, is it resources, a piece of technology, mentorship, advisors network? What's been a recipe for your success so far?
Well, certainly a big believer in surrounding yourself with people who are much smarter than you. That is certainly something that is incredibly important. I think you want people who are super smart, super driven, but like I said, they're humble, they're friendly, good to be around. But I certainly have no interest in being the smartest person in the room. And I think patience. I think most founders are by definition impatient. They want it to move faster. We always try push. And I think especially in the business we're in, there's been a certain amount of, if you're partnering with banks, certainly the upside is they find you all their client. The downside is they move slower than you might hope. And so just learning that patience and keep pushing forward, keep believing, and knowing that we're all going in the right direction. It's certainly been a good lesson for me.
Yeah. What's a contrarian view that you have that maybe most would disagree with, if anything?
I was not a big believer in crypto. I think at the moment, that looks smart. Tell me again in 5 years, but was not a believer in that one. So we'll stick. That'll be my answer there.
Love it. I love it. We think about the journey and building companies. Obviously, you've had a wealth of experience with Extend so far. Is there anything you miss about the early days of building that you don't get to maybe work on or as responsible for nowadays? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the early days, I was writing code, building Extend. I built the original prototypes. I built the product that we sold to our earliest investors. I love that part. And nothing is more satisfying than writing code and coming up to a problem and solving it. And even you're alone in your room and woo, right? Yeah. Nothing beats that rush. But I would also argue that nothing beats the rush of, I always say, walking into our office and seeing all the people who are working on this product that the three of founders dreamed up 7 years ago, and seeing all these people who believe in it. And it's a real thing. It's not a dream anymore. That is truly inspiring to me. And it makes me feel good every day. So I'm happy to have traded that. And I'm sure in the next 3 years, there'll be more trades. I think, like I said, constantly learning, constantly doing something new, keep growing yourself, keep growing the team is incredibly powerful. Yeah. So it's a worthwhile trade-off.
Yeah. And you have a hybrid team now post-COVID, right? If I remember correctly.
Well, even pre-COVID. So okay. We have folks spread around the entire US. Our employee number one was someone I'd worked with extensively prior to Extend. And the story I like to say is he and I worked together, I think 3 or 4 years prior to Extend. We had never met in real life. He lives in LA. I live in New York. We worked pre-Slack. We would have Hip Chat. You remember Hip Chat from Atlassian? We would turn the video off, and we would just chat and talk all day while we were working. We hired him. I'd never met him in real life until after we had hired him. And since then, for the right people, being remote, no problem at all. You can really get incredible work out of folks like that. And I mean, for myself, I was mostly remote for my clients for a tremendously long time. So I knew that worked. But then we also know the value of being together in a space, being co-located, really being able to bang on ideas with each other, being able to be inspired by each other and building those bonds. So we have a hybrid approach in which we have a good portion of the team is spread around the US, and then a large bit is also in New York.
Yeah. How do you manage culture like that? Being that it's kind of half and half, or do you kind of have different activities? What do you do with being that it's such a different experience? How do you bring those experiences together or acknowledge the differences between them? I'm so curious.
Well, so because it was from day one, I think it's something that we've always learned. It wasn't something that we had to learn as a result of the pandemic. So that made it significantly easier. But it's about being intentional and thoughtful, right? You have to think, okay, I remember that these people are not here with me. I have to make sure to include them. I have to make sure that when we're having a meeting that everyone's cameras are on and we're all talking and addressing everyone. So it's not that you have a set of people in a room and all the remote folks are not included. That's the work. Yeah. I think then for the culture and the socializing, we have a tremendously strong Slack culture. I think we have a lot of ridiculous humor and memes bouncing around Slack all day long. We early on, again, dipping back into COVID, we would have happy hours once a week. And we started with regular games that you could find online. And we quickly burned through those and decided that we need to make up our own games. We have a lot of very creative people on our team. And so we continue that because those are some of the most fun games that we've done. And so I think that if you make something up custom, you can include everyone all you want. And I go back again thinking as inspiration, my favorite game that we played ever, we all just took pictures of our fridge. We opened our fridge, took a picture, and we all had to get together. We had to guess whose fridge was whose. And it's just these very simple, ridiculous ideas. It's just that builds like culture and camaraderie. But then you go back again to what I was saying before. Everyone that we bring on, we make sure that we feel like they know how to be nice, be friendly, right? We don't have to be friends with everyone, but we want to make sure, I think we're a group of people who really bond together. And so as long as you push that, then we haven't had any issues with that balance between remote and in person.
Yeah. For those remote employees, I'm wondering, I've talked to some founders recently, how do you support programs outside of work in support? Because we're not everyone's life should be involved in work. It's not helpful for necessarily work-life balance and all the health outcomes we've now come to realize our industrial age. But how do you think about sponsoring programs or just like offering them value outside of work? Do you all think about that, or what is your philosophy around how much work should be involved in someone's everyday life?
Right. Well, I think, as I mentioned, we aim to hire people who are curious and want to keep learning. And so, and again, if we offer them learning experiences while they're working, give them the opportunity to do technology they haven't done, solve problems they haven't done, that's very fulfilling. If we can also provide opportunities for keep learning outside of work, that's great. So if people want to go to conferences to learn something to grow their network and where they're already expert, if they want to take classes and learn something they actually don't feel comfortable or want to expand their knowledge, also good, something that we support, right? And just in general, if people have ideas, I'm doing this for community service, I have something that I'm passionate about, they know it's a safe space, again, to say, hey, by the way, entire company, this is something that's important to me. Who would like to be involved? And so I think if you create that environment, then people just can feel comfortable with really pushing for what they value. And that's what's important to us. At the end of the day, you're right. This is not only about work, this is about people. And it's about growing people and letting them continue to learn and evolve.
Yeah. Thinking about what's had a lasting impact in your career and your life, what are some books or people who've truly had a lasting impact for you as a founder? Anything that you could share with the audience?
It's a very good question. I would say everything I do is for my family. So a slightly different approach than maybe what you're looking for, but I have two wonderful kids and my wife, and everything that I do is for them. So they certainly push me to do my best. And I think overall, my team members all inspire me pretty daily. Again, going back to seeing what inspires them, seeing what energizes them. And so I take a lot of value out of that.
Yeah. If you weren't working on Extend, what would you be doing? Any other product, any other interesting industry outside of what you're doing now?
That is a very good question. I'm certainly all in at the moment, so I don't let my mind wander there. I've been a musician for quite a long time, so I certainly would dream of at some point actually doing something more along those lines. I also love working with my hands. So there's something very rewarding about building digital because you can build things fast, iterate fast, but there's something very rewarding also about making physical things. And there it is, and you can hold it and look at it and get it just right. So maybe some of those two things.
Yeah, I love that. Danny, it's been such a pleasure asking you all these questions, hearing your feedback, talking about your experiences, listening to your opinions and perspectives. Last little bit before we end the show, is there anything we left on the table? Any question I didn't ask you that I should have?
I think we covered quite a bit. I think really you dove into what make Extend different. Maybe just to reiterate that, of course, I think our main selling point here is that our partnership with banks, what differentiates us from everyone else. And so that's what pushed us forward in the market. And I think at the end of the day, we're really seeing a lot of growth out of that. So super excited.
Amazing. Danny, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Last little bit is, where can we find you? Give us our audience, your Facebooks, your Twitters, wherever we can find and be a supporter, but also hear your ideas and share with your success. Where can we find you?
Yeah, I would say mostly I live on LinkedIn. So it's certainly easy to find me there. If you search Danny Morrow Extend, that's where I'm busy sharing my thoughts about the industry and about Extend.
Amazing. Danny, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you again for being on Behind Company Lines today.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.